Extra, extra, think all about it. Extra, extra, think all about it. Every child in the United States of America deserves to read and rise. And not just in the United States of America's communities' eyes. Every child in the United States of America deserves to read and rise. To be successful in this 21st century world and thrive, every child in the United States of America deserves to read and rise. And not read to just get by, but read to really have a chance at their 21st century piece of the pie. So we've come together today so that I can begin to encourage parents and caregivers to understand how to help their children at home read and rise. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you into the Robinson Resident. My name is John Robinson, and you are in my office, in my home. I'm the Director of Education for the Houston Area Urban League here in Houston, Texas, and I'm also one of the National Executive Consultants and Facilitators for Scholastic, Inc., the book company. And on today, starting today and the next 3 Fridays, I am going to offer a session for parents and caregivers to understand how to support their children's literacy development at home. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what we call a read aloud. Now, a read aloud is one of the most important activities that any parent can use to help build their child's knowledge and skills around learning for the future. And I want to encourage you that during the course of these read alouds, I am going to model for you all of the objectives that are required to do a successful read aloud. But first of all, I want to give you the proper definition for what we call a read aloud. A read aloud is not complete unless you also include with the read aloud what we call text talk or text discussion. So the appropriate definition for a read aloud becomes a read aloud plus text talk. A read aloud plus text talk, where you read a text aloud to a child, and then you have a discussion with that child about that text, which builds vocabulary, because you'll begin in the discussion to use words that wasn't in the actual text to have the discussion. So we're constantly building our kids' vocabularies. But let me go on. I want to share with you the 4 objectives that every read aloud plus text talk must include. Now, parents, caregivers, first of all, I want to suggest to you that any text that you're going to read aloud to your child, you should read several times to make sure that you are familiar with that text. Then in doing so, here are the 4 objectives that as you read it before the text, before the read aloud plus text talk begins with your child, that you achieve these objectives and be ready for the read aloud plus text talk. Objective number 1, you want to take time to find vocabulary words in the text that you believe your child may not know, so that your child doesn't have to waste time trying to decode words to understand and comprehend the text. You will have already achieved that for them, so that all they have to do is listen and comprehend, because you're going to define words that they may not understand. So your first objective in a read aloud plus text talk, parent, caregiver, is that you go through the text, find words, find vocabulary words that you know your baby may not know. Now, this first read aloud plus text talk that we're going to do with you is going to be for kids pre-K through 3rd grade. So the second objective for this read aloud plus text talk that you will provide for your kids will be the fact that as you go through the text, you want to be able to find what we call story starters. That's going through the text and pulling out different pieces of the text that you want to have a conversation with your kid about, to ensure your baby is comprehending the text as you move through the text. Number 3, the third thing you want to be able to do, parents, caregivers, is you want to make sure that throughout the reading of the text, before you do the read aloud plus text talk with your baby, that you find a writing prompt so that we can have our kids to begin to write after every read aloud plus text discussion or text talk, you want to make sure that your child is writing. Why? Because you want to be able to see the kind of writing your child is performing so that you can help increase or enhance their ability to understand how to write. Reading and writing go together, and we've got to make sure that our kids are able to put on paper what it is they've gathered from the information from the text. And then number 4, and the final objective, is that you always want to have an activity at the end of the read aloud plus text talk so that you can bring the entire text to life. So those are the 4 objectives that you want to be able to ensure that you do every single time, parents, caregivers, that you do a read aloud plus text talk. Now, I want to share with you today how this read aloud plus text talk is going to work. I've selected for our first read aloud plus text talk a book by Trudy Ludwig called The Invisible Boy. It was illustrated by Patrice Barton, who did a wonderful job in illustrating this book. Now, understand here about this particular selection, and I want you to see this as we go through it. This is about social behavior, emotional behavior. Research has proven that academic learning is actually linked to social and emotional behavior. And you're going to get to see some real social needs that our kids have when we go through this read aloud today. This particular book, The Invisible Boy, is about a young man who seems to never be seen by all of the other kids in the class. And for some reason, when these kids decide to do group activities, when they decide to play games, or even when individual kids in the group have birthday parties, they never seem to invite the invisible boy to be a part of any of those activities. But as you will see, there is a new kid who comes into the class by the name of Justin. Justin is the new kid who comes to the class, and Justin and the invisible boy, for some reason, immediately make a connection. And in that connection, the 2 of them will eventually team up on a class project to where the invisible boy will have a chance to shine and be brought to light. So parents and caregivers, as we go through this read aloud plus text talk about the invisible boy, what I really like about this time period is not the crisis that we're in, but the opportunity that each of you have as parents and leaders in your house to reconnect with your child, to reconnect with your children, to reclaim your role as your child's first and most important educator and role model, because that's who you are. And it gives us a chance to begin to reteach some of the values that we may have overlooked. But having this time to spend with our kids, nobody can go outside. So now we've got a great opportunity to reclaim our role. And having the chance to do that, I think it's important that we begin to reteach how small acts of kindness can help children feel included and allow them to become and be the greatest that they can be. I believe that every child in America deserves a chance to be great. Parents, caregivers, this is the opportunity that's being given to each of us to begin to rework that idea and make sure that all of our kids have the ability to read and to comprehend what they read and to critically think about what they read and to be able to discuss with others what they read, to be able to write about what they read, and then be able to put their voices on record telling others what it is that they believe about what they've read. So let's do a read aloud plus text talk in this book called The Invisible Boy. Now, parents, when you read aloud to your kids, I want to show you how I'm holding this book. I'm going to be able to see this book and read this book, and I'm going to be able to share all of the wonderful illustrations that Patrice has done in this book with my kid, you with your kid. And as I go through this book, I am going to share with you some of the vocabulary words that I have identified that I think a pre-K through third grader might struggle with. I am going to share with you some of the story starters that I've selected, maybe one story starter just to give you an idea of what I've selected from The Invisible Boy. And then I'm going to share with you a writing prompt that I've selected from The Invisible Boy, and then an activity that I think you would consider at home doing. And then at the end of this Read Aloud Plus Text Talk, I'm going to provide for you a week's of activities that I would suggest you have your kid do. And we'll talk about that as we complete the Read Aloud. Voice is important in the Read Aloud. Your demeanor is important. Your emphasis on words are important. Bringing the story to life is important. You need to come out of being mom or dad and get into being the characters that you need to be from the text. And so now I want to model for you this story, The Invisible Boy. The Invisible Boy by Trudy Ludwig, illustrated by Patricia Barton. The Invisible Boy. Here he is right here. Now I want you to notice how all of the other kids in the illustration are in color. But the Invisible Boy, you can barely see him because he is illustrated in black and white and can hardly be seen. So listen to the Read Aloud Plus Text Talk. Can you see Brian, the Invisible Boy? Even Mrs. Cartler has trouble noticing him in her classroom. She's too busy dealing with Nathan and Sophie. Nathan has a problem with Mrs. Carlotta's calling what Mrs. Carlotta calls volume control. That's the up and down of using the voice. He uses his outside voice inside too much. Sophie whines and complains when she doesn't get her way. Nathan and Sophie take up a lot of space. Brian doesn't. When the bell rings for recess, Micah and JT take turns choosing kids for their kickball team. The best players get picked first. Then the best friends of the best players. Then the friends of the best friends. Only Brian is left, still waiting and hoping. JT glances in Brian's direction and just as quickly looks away. We've got enough players for each team, he tells the others. Let's play ball. In the cafeteria, Madison and her friends talk about her birthday party. The rope swinging over the pool was awesome, says JT. Yeah, so was the water slide, added Fiona. That was the best pool party ever. I'm so glad you guys had fun, says Madison. Everybody did except Brian. He wasn't invited. At choosing time, While the other kids played board games and read, Brian sat at his table, doing what he loved to do best. He draws fire-breathing dragons, scaling tall buildings. Thank you for toasting my marshmallow, the man hanging out of the window that Brian drew, and the dragon breathing down fire. Excuse me. Greedy pirates digging treasures. Space aliens locked in intergalactic battles. Hi, friend, have a cookie? And superheroes with the power to make friends wherever they go. On Monday morning, Mrs. Carlotta introduces Justin, a new student, to the class. Brian smiles shyly at him. Some of the other kids sneak looking at Justin, trying to figure out if he's cool enough to be their friend. They haven't quite made up their minds yet. At lunch, Madison and JT watch Justin eat with chopsticks. "What's that?" asked Madison as she points toward Justin's food. "It's bulgogo." Bul what? Bulgogo. It's Korean barbecue beef. My grandma made it for me. It's really good. Do you want to try it? There's no way I'd eat bulgogo. And the kids laughed. All of them. That is, except Brian. He sat there wondering, which is worse, being laughed at or feeling invisible? The next day, Justin goes to his cubby to put away his backpack. He notices a piece of paper with his name on it. Here's the paper. "Justin, I thought the bulgogo looked good. Brian, yum." At morning recess, Brian finds a piece of chalk in the ground and starts drawing away. "Hey, Judson," Emily called out from the tetherbell court. "You're up next." "Sorry, gotta go," says Justin. "By the way, that's a really cool drawing," he had before taking off. Back in class, Miss Carlotta asked the kids to team up in 2s or 3s for a special project. The kids scurry around the room to pair off. Brian heads towards Justin. "I'm already with Justin," says Emilio. "Find someone else." Brian looked at the floor, wishing he could draw a hole right there to swallow him up. Mrs. Carlotta said, "We can have 2 or 3 people in our group. We're only 2. Emily, let him work with us." "Okay, I guess." So Mrs. Carlotta gives the class directions for the project. Your assignment is to work together to write a story about what you see in this photograph, using your imagination and having fun. Here's the photograph. "Whoa, cool," says Emily. "What kind of people do you think live in a house like this?" "I don't know, but I bet Brian could draw them to go with our story," says Justin. Brian smiles and he takes out his lucky pen. And then Brian and Justin and Emily. "The crooked story we made up on the fly. It's lunchtime again, Brian's least favorite part of the day. Another 20 long minutes of kids talking and laughing with everyone else but him. Brian, Brian, he hears someone shout. Hey, Brian, over here. Brian turns and sees Justin waving him over. Emily nods at Brian as he makes room for him at the table. Cookie? Thanks. Maybe, just maybe, Brian is not so invisible after all. The end. Okay, parents and caregivers. So let me show and share with you some of the 4 objectives you would then take into consideration. Now, you could do this one of 2 ways. You could actually stop and interject these along the reading as you go through the reading, especially with reference to the vocabulary words. Now, I kind of defined it, a few of the vocabulary words that, in my opinion, a pre-K through 3rd grader might struggle with. And I've shared words like invisible, which simply means unable to see. But so your pre-K through 3rd grader does not be stagnant with understanding the text, comprehending the text, I would just, as I go through, say, now, do you understand what that word invisible means? And then I would just list a number of words that I felt like my kid would struggle with so that we could make sure that as I read the text, he or she is comprehending everything. Then story starters. If I were to do a story starter from The Invisible Boy, parents, caregivers, here's how I would handle that. I would say to my kid, I want to ask you about the section of the text when the bell rang for recess. Micah and JT took turns choosing kids for their kickball team. You remember that? So here's my question to you. How did Micah and JT choose players for their kickball team? Number 1. Then I would give my kid a chance to respond to that. When he or she responded to that, then I would follow up with this question. Was it the fair way to select players? I would give them a chance to respond yes or no. And in that response, I would follow up with this final question to them. Why or why not was it the fair way to select players? You're having a discussion with your child. You're drawing out your child's memory about what they remember from the text. You're having a discussion where you're building vocabulary. You're adding words to the conversation with your child that wasn't in the text. So now you're building more and more vocabulary. I want to share with you the idea that the vocabulary that you use at home is the vocabulary that your child takes outside your door. Your vocabulary becomes your children's vocabulary. So we need to use a plethora of words that actually builds on your child's vocabulary. Objective number 3, the writing prompt. Now here's what I would do from The Invisible Boy as a writing prompt. Write about, I'd ask my kid, how you feel about the question from this text. Now here's what I want you to remember from the text. The thought came as he sat there wondering, talking about Brian. As Brian sat there wondering, which is worse, being laughed at or feeling invisible. I want you to write and tell me, which do you think is worse? Do you think it's worse to be laughed at by a group of your classmates or to be feeling invisible because nobody ever sees you, never asks you to be a part of the group, never asks you to be a part of the game, never invites you to any of their birthday parties or any other kind of activities that they have? You're always being left out or you're always being laughed at. Which of those do you feel is worse? I want you to write about it. I want you to put it in writing and tell me how you feel. And then finally, parents and caregivers, you should design an activity in your home where you could bring to focus with your child or with your children how to cope and thrive in their social world. This social world can be mean to our kids. It's because we haven't worked at home to show our kids how to respond to the social world that they're involved in every single day. It is incumbent upon you, the parent, the caregiver, to make sure you take care of making sure your kids are academically, socially, and emotionally ready to go out into their social world. I want to suggest to you, parents, that that is always and always will be all about you, but not about you. I want to say that again. You making sure that you have these discussions around what you read to your child is all about you, but not about you. Now, here's the final component of this. I want to give you weekly activities from the read aloud that we just did. But you can do this from any of the read alouds that you do with your kids. The first thing I want to suggest to you is that I would design a weekly activity, especially from this pandemic crisis period that we're in. I would use this at my home with my kid to actually build a memorial to this time that maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, we could look back at and have a discussion about this time. So using this read aloud plus text talk, here's what I would encourage you to do. I would encourage you to invite your kid into your digital resource room at home, whether it be a desktop, a laptop, an iPad, or your cellular. I would invite them to share with them an opportunity to work together to identify one word from the text that names an action that took place in the invisible boy, a behavior that took place in the invisible boy, a character that was brought to their memory that they would use from the invisible boy, and then the location of where this all took place. Then what I would have them to do each day, Tuesday through Thursday, each day after having read with your child, I would have them take that word and add a pictorial drawing of theirs to express their vision of the word, their feeling about the word. Draw a picture, have colors and paper available to them. And on Tuesday, I would have them to define the action word that you selected, and then draw a pictorial that you could put on the wall. Then on Wednesday, I would have them take the word that you selected for behavior and draw a picture and put it on the wall. On Thursday, the character that was selected, draw a picture, put a pictorial of that character on the wall. And then on Friday, design a picture with the location where this took place. And then under each of those pictures, have your child to write an expression about how they felt about that particular word with reference to the read aloud plus text talk. And then how they feel about their own social encounters about those particular words. Now, I want to suggest to you that this concludes this particular read aloud plus text talk. But on next Friday, I'm going to come back to you. This particular read aloud was for parents and caregivers to implement with kids from pre-K through third grade. But on next Friday, I'm going to come back with a read aloud for you to implement a read aloud plus text talk with a child from 4th through 6th grade. And then on the following Friday, I'm going to come back with a read aloud plus text talk for parents and caregivers who have children in 7th and 8th grade. And then on the final Friday, I'm going to come back with a read aloud plus text talk implementation or activity for you to do with a high schooler grades 9 through 12. A read aloud, as I said earlier, is the number one activity that we can use to help build the reading, the literacy skills of our children. So I want to invite you back into the Robinson home, into my office every Friday for the next 4 Fridays, and share with you this read aloud plus text talk session and activity that you, the parent, you, the caregiver, who is in fact your child's first and most important educator and role model, can do at home during these trying times. What a blessing it is for us to have the opportunity to reconnect ourselves, recommit ourselves, and rebuild our role as our child's first and most important educator in our homes, to take the leadership again in our homes, in making sure that every single one of our children has a chance to be great. To have a chance to be great, to grow up great, means that we, parents and caregivers, are making sure that when our kids walk out of our doors to go back to school, to go into the community, to be a part of society, they are able to read and comprehend what they read and critically think about what they read, to write about what they read, to have discussions about what they read, and stand before anybody to express themselves about how they feel and what they believe from what they've read. Thank you for being with us in the Robinson home. My name is John Robinson from the Houston Area Urban League and Scholastic Books. Good evening.